Okay, so Black Bear is a very unique and interesting movie, and I feel the only way that I can talk about this is just by spoiling everything off the bat. The movie begins with Aubrey Plaza, and Aubrey Plaza plays Allison. Off the bat, I love movies like this. I love movies that show you a character and there's no dialogue. You get a sense of the scenery, you absorb the surroundings, and it's all about facial expression. That's how a message is conveyed. I love movies like that, so immediately I was sucked in because of those elements. Now we get off into our weird nature of the story, which is part one. This movie is cut into two parts. Part one is called The Bear in the Road. And when I saw that title, I had no idea what it meant, and I still don't think I know what it means. But part one kicks off with Allison, and Allison is a director. She used to be an actor, but now she's a director. She's going to this isolated house to come up with a story because she has writer's block. And she encounters Gabe, who is played by Christopher Abbott, and Blair, who is played by Sarah Godin. Blair is pregnant with Gabe's child. And I feel that Blair and Gabe have a very interesting relationship. They like to bicker amongst each other in front of company.
What? The doctor said I could have a few glasses of wine every now and then.
She didn't say a few, she said a couple.
Okay, this is my second.
This will be your third that I know of. And once in a while isn't every night. Okay, here. You happy? I just want you to remember this night when the baby comes out all fucked up.
I love this scene. I love this scene at the dinner table. I love the conversation that they're having, and the facial expressions are also at play here because there is this constant thing that is being brought up where Allison says she doesn't like compliments, right? And she tells this to Blair. So Blair's aware of this. But then there's a moment where they're at the dinner table where Blair gives Allison a compliment about the movies that she makes. And then Allison says, thank you. And earlier she kept saying, I don't like compliments. So then the camera pans on Blair after that moment. And I'm thinking that, okay, now Blair is thinking, wait a minute, didn't you say you just don't like compliments? But she doesn't say anything. But you can see it, that's what she's thinking with her facial expression. You can see it in her eyes. They're all trying to dissect each other, or mostly Blair is trying to dissect Allison. But with that being said, we do get a sense of a lot of sexual tension between Gabe and Allison. Because at the beginning of part one, when Allison first arrives, Gabe and Allison are having a conversation as they're walking up to the house, and they're kind of flirting with each other, and Allison gives Gabe this look like, yeah, she's either thinking about getting with him or she wants to get with him. Gabe and Blair, they're only together because Blair is pregnant. If Blair wasn't pregnant, they wouldn't be together. So it seems like they're not right for each other because they're just bickering back and forth and they're arguing in front of each other, and they're doing it in front of company. Like you would think that you would have the respect for each other to have that kind of conversation behind closed doors. You don't, especially to a stranger who you just met, you know? So I thought that was kind of weird. They're just really disrespecting each other. And Gabe is so off of the rails. He's unhinged at this point to where he just goes off on this rant and he has this epic explosion.
Nature is just gonna fucking do what it do, you know? And the fucking earth is gonna be consumed by the sun.
Fuck.
And all this shit like ideology, religion, consumerism, you know, it's all just a bunch of bullshit that people created to distract ourselves from the idea that we live in a fucking horrible shithole.
Yes.
It's a big shithole, meaningless fuckhole.
How is it helpful to think that way, Gabe?
I think what's bothering him is the fact that he's not ready to have a child, especially with Blair. He's just scared.
So I love all the dialogue in here. I love all of the actors' performances. I love the character dynamics. It's all fantastic and perfectly executed. So then Blair and Gabe have a conversation. Blair is convinced that Gabe is in love with Allison, and at this point I was saying, Allison, why don't you just leave? Why are you still there? Gabe convinces Blair that he's not in love with Allison, but then Blair falls asleep, and then Gabe goes to see Allison, and you can tell Allison wants Gabe, and Gabe wants Allison, but he's trying to resist. So then eventually, Allison and Gabe end up getting into a sexual encounter with each other. And then Blair finally wakes up and discovers what Allison and Gabe are doing, and she has a freak out moment. And then Gabe uses too much strength and knocks Blair down on the sofa. Blair starts bleeding. Allison's freaking out. Gabe's freaking out. Blair's freaking out. Everybody's freaking out. Gabe says, Allison, get the car. She goes to get the car. They get in the car. And now we know what the bear in the road means. The bear in the road is literally a bear in the road, because that's how part 1 ends. They see a bear in the road, which is kind of scary, and the tension is ramped up to 100. This is what I love about part 1. I think it starts off really slow, but then as we get to know these characters, the tension just builds and builds and builds. We have great conversation here, perfect execution, and then by the conclusion of it all, it's at 100% intensity, and it just abruptly ends. And so I assume that they all died, or at least they're severely injured. But part 1 ends with the bear in the road and the car crashes. So then we kick into part 2, which I was taken back about that at first, because I said at that exact moment, as soon as we hit our transition, I said to myself, what in the hell is going on here? Part 2 starts off with Allison back on that dock where we first started. We're always going back to the dock. But this time, we're seeing what's going on behind the scenes. So it's a movie within a movie. And this time, Allison is in a relationship with Gabe, and Blair is working with Gabe as a director's assistant or something. It's mentioned that Blair is an actor. But part 2 has a lot more characters in it. And these characters are very interesting. We see this Latino woman who has constant diarrhea because she ate some bad tilapia, I think. And it's very funny. I thought this character, this actor, the performance was very funny. Perfect execution. And then the story in this is Gabe wants to get the best performance he can possibly get out of Allison. So he pushes her. And what he does is that he pretends that he and Blair are having something going on behind the scenes. And they're deliberately doing this in front of Allison so they can get a good performance out of her. They want her to use all of that real emotion and put it into the scene. But you can see it's breaking down Allison. It's tearing her down. And Aubrey Plaza, man, she gave a fantastic performance in this movie, in both parts, throughout the entire thing. I've never seen Aubrey Plaza like this before. She gives a fantastic whirlwind roller coaster ride of emotion. She has range in this movie. She gives a fantastic performance. And so does Christopher Abbott. Christopher Abbott, he plays 2 different characters in this movie, and he does it seamlessly. Because in part 1, he's like this guy who's just a regular dude, and he doesn't know what he wants to do with his life, and he's scared of having a baby. But then in part 2, he's kind of this, I don't want to say egotistical, but he's a director, and he pushes his actors to their breaking point, and he has these mannerisms where he's talking in an intense manner, and he's like blinking his eyes a lot, and his head is tilting a little bit. His head moves in different ways. So I like the fact that he implemented those different mannerisms. And so it just builds. It's like part 1, where part 1 starts off really slow, but then the tension builds. And then part 2, it starts off kind of boring, but then you get familiar with these characters. There are some funny shenanigans going on, like with this coffee constantly being spilled. There's this mention about the coffee being too hot. This lady has diarrhea. People are getting high and having sex with each other. All this kind of craziness going on. And the main story in the center of it all, which is the focal point, which is just a whirlwind of emotions going on here. So Allison flips out on Blair. And then Gabe gets what he wants. He gets the performance that he wanted to get out of Allison. But then just like in part 1 with Blair and Gabe, This one in part 2 is with Allison and Gabe, where Allison says, "Do you love Blair?" And Gabe's like, "I don't love her." But then just like in part 1, Gabe gets up, he goes to see Blair, and then they start having sex. Now, the thing that baffles me here is the conclusion to part 2. Part 1 makes sense. Part 2 is ambiguous, where Allison wakes up, she catches Gabe and Blair having sex, then she turns around and sees the bear. So a literal bear is there again, and it's by the boathouse. So the titles are direct. They mean what they say. It's not a metaphorical thing, I assume, because I did look up what bears mean, and from what I understand, bears, it says on Google that they symbolize introspection and intuition blended with instinct. I don't know if I saw any of that in here. Maybe I did, but I don't know if the black bear title is a metaphorical sense or if it's just something that's thrown in there. I have no idea. But you see the bear at the bottom of the steps, and then Allison walks towards the bear, and we cut to black. And at that moment, I thought she committed suicide, and I thought we were going to hear some sound effects of the bear growling and slashing her and her screaming, but we don't hear any of that. So I don't know how this ends, so it's confusing. It's ambiguous. Then we go back to where we first started. So then I was assuming that she's suffering from writer's block, so she's writing these stories, and as she's writing them, the stories are showed to us as she's picturing it in her mind. Overall, my verdict for this movie is it's good. This is a good movie. Lawrence Michael Levine. I was so confused as to what this movie meant that I had to watch some interviews with him. And I watched these interviews, and it's up in the air that this movie is autobiographical. This movie is about the experiences that he has had on set dealing with actors, directors, and all that stuff. And I say up in the air because he debunks all of that in the interview. He says this movie's not autobiographical. I'm not that kind of director. This is not based on my life or anything like that.
Drew from all your own experiences, and maybe that what your wife helped in supporting you this time. She helped you translate your experiences into maybe something less literal and more experimental and other stuff you've done.
Well, yeah, she helped me in so many ways.
I do feel that this movie does have some messages in it. It's not just entertainment.
We live in a fucking horrible shithole. Yes. It's a big shithole, meaningless fuckhole.